you like true crime, you're probably going to love this. This is Flashback Perspectives. I'm Instructor Thompson in my self-defense studio. This is a podcast and blog on real violence and remembering, flashing back to the perspectives that we had during and after real violence, real attacks have occurred. Up next in Flashback Perspectives, we have Sensei Coffey. Sensei Coffey is the host of the Keep Kicking podcast, who was recommended to me from a friend, Christian, Haymakers MMA, and Michael Sensei, both who had been on his show. I found out he is also a part of, big fan of our friends, Mr. Lesniak's company, Whistle Kick, and all the wonderful things that they do there with the Martial Summit. We had a fantastic conversation, and he is a Shaolin Kempo practitioner. More than just that, he cross-trains in several applications and learns so much from his podcast. I can't encourage you enough to go check out, as I am also sitting and listening to all of his interviews and the wonderful instructors that come on and share all of their very valuable lessons right there on his show. For our segment in Flashback Perspectives, we go through events that happened with him, trauma, what you can do about it, his work now, and how you can work on healing and what he does for his students to be able to help them along their healing journey. Please listen, learn vicariously. The best way. I hope you enjoy the interview. So you should know there is help out there. In this episode, we're going to be sharing some resources. If you've experienced real violence or are affected by any of these things, you should reach out and get some help. And I understand some people, money's the issue, but there's free help out there too. Just talking with people can very much so be beneficial. If you think that you're alone in these experiences, or that something that you experienced was not normal, I would wager you'd be surprised. Not a lot of people will understand, except for people who've been through it, and there is help out there for you. Welcome, everybody, to Flashback Perspectives. I'm Instructor Thompson. Today, we have Sensei Paul Coffey with us, and I want you to be able to pay attention to this lesson specifically. This is such good material. One of the reasons why I love doing these and being able to share our lessons in reality of violence with you. Sir, if you please, go ahead, introduce yourself.
My name is Sensei Paul Coffey. I am a 5th degree black belt in Shaolin Kempo, 1st degree Sash in Tai Chi, and a disciple in Wu Fa Ching Wing Chun. I have been doing martial arts for 33 years. I've been teaching for 29. I'll share a story. I was 18 years old. At that point in time, I'd been teaching for about 4 years. I was, at that point in time, I was, let's say, 6 years out of the shit, where I had stood up to my abuser and he stopped physically abusing me. There was still some mental abuse and some verbal abuse. I was 2 years removed away from his own death. And so he attempted to kill himself when I was a little younger by getting drunk and driving 70 miles an hour into a tree. Well, we understand that when you're drunk, your body goes with the flow. So in that event, he was in an upper body cast. His jaw was wired shut. He had broken both of his collarbones. He had broken one of his shoulders. He had broken several ribs, broken his jaw, and several teeth. He had to be fed emulsified food. I took care of him for that month.
Did you? Oh,
yes. Took care of him for that month, him bad-mouthing me. When he got out of the cast, I think it was like actually 6 weeks or something, but when he got out of the cast, I took care of him for the time frame. He killed himself then, officially. So all of that, like, muddiness, those are all the things that I had gone through in a quick snapshot. And I was in this class with this older lady that had been with us for quite a while. You know, she was heading at that point in time, she was heading toward black belt, maybe around brown belt, hadn't quite gotten there yet. Thankfully, she did stick around. And she had a very visceral reaction to something that was happening in class. I saw it, I witnessed it, and she immediately left, darted in the middle of class and was in her car. I saw everything that happened, was like, wait a second, that can't be. I went to my senior student that was in the class. I was like, can you please take over? I'll be right back. And I went out to her. She was just sitting in the parking lot in the car. And so like I approached her window. She was nice. She entrusted me enough that she was willing to roll the window down. So she rolled the window down and we had a conversation. And like the conversation started and she said, Paul, in 9 years, this is the 7th martial arts school that I've participated in. And this is the farthest that I've ever gotten in my journey. And she said, and I thank you guys for making me feel very safe. But sometimes people are reminded of bad things. And then she said, I was raped a decade ago, and that's why I come to school. She goes, that's why I've tried all those other martial arts schools and didn't find a place where I felt safe enough to learn.
Right.
And that was the first student that I ever told my story to.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like shared my story. We had a cry. We had a hug. I said, Karen, I completely understand. I need you to understand. You heard my story. You know that I know what it's like to be a victim. I completely understand if you don't want to come back in this class and try and do things today. But I beg you, it would be in your best interest if you came back into the school and even sat in the corner and watched the rest of the class. And she did that. She took me up on the offer, watched the rest of the class. She stayed after, and her and I, one-on-one, worked through the thing that triggered her just a little bit. We didn't spend a lot of time on it. We didn't hound on it, kept it light so that like she could navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think because of the way that I reacted, she was able to keep going in our school. She got her second degree black belt, I think is where she ended up quitting when she moved. And I don't know if she's still doing martial arts or not, but I'm happy enough that because of who I am, I could foster that experience for her. But that moment made me realize we don't know everything about any of the people that we teach. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know if they have any triggers or any traumas. We have no idea. So we have to meet them where they are and where they're presenting in that moment. And part of that is being genuine as people, is expressing our own fallibility and expressing the things that we've been through. Because I want my story to be heard so that people go, oh, you can make it through this.
That's excellent.
There's a reason to keep going. So.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with me. That is awesome and very cool. We were talking about this previously there with the emotional intelligence being the highest form of intelligence is what I always say, just because you have to take yourself out of yourself to be able to empathize. And that was huge. I had to have felt like both horrible and amazing at the same time for you.
Absolutely.
It's such a weird thing to say, I know, but like, you know, when you have real trauma, it's very difficult. But you can have those points where you can, you know, have, I wouldn't say overcome, I'd say more like hurdle. I don't know, you know, if you ever get to a point, and maybe some people can, I don't know that I ever have, even working on it. I'm okay talking about things now, but, you know, that it becomes very difficult to meet to a place where you're okay with it. So I think it's amazing that you were able to meet her where she was and still help her along her journey. Because you're right, a lot of people just, they wave the past and they can't continue because, you know, of what they experienced. Well, can you describe what did that feel like for you in that moment?
The moment with the student or
what about, so the moment with the student, but the moment in the class when you were watching it, like I always like to describe it as almost like you're watching a car accident in slow motion, you know, like it's difficult to see.
So you sent me your questions that you kind of like do in the basic framework, and I'm reading them and I'm like, this is heavy. And my story is I went up to Marshall Summit, and one of the classes that I did was actually a lecture that was on trauma-informed martial arts instruction.
Okay.
And when I start that I sit down and I'm like, I'm Paul. I've been doing martial arts for 33 years. I've been teaching for 29. 5th degree black belt in Shaolin Kempo, 1st degree Sash and Tai Chi, and a discipleship in Wu Fa Ching Wing Chun. I have studied an ad nauseum of other martial arts, but not ranked officially in those. That is my resume so that you understand where I can come from to speak about violence. And then I said, now, I was born with a birth defect that is called pectus chest. My ribs and my breastplate were growing inward, crushing me to death. I had at the time, the earliest surgery in recorded history in the state of Kentucky. They waited as long as they could, and it was if they waited any longer, my body would crush itself to death. But they didn't know if I was going to survive the surgery. I was 26 months old. So I had that, which then psychologically, that does a lot for a person. You know, that I have a very different relationship with death in terms of my own death. Very accepting of it. The Hakakura says you put yourself to death before you put yourself to bed every night. And I cannot relate heavier to any other piece of philosophy ever written. So I had a lot of health issues as a kid because of that. Then we flash forward to the age of 9. My uncle started abusing me. That abuse was physical abuse, and it became sexual abuse at the age of 10. When I was 10 years old, my uncle held me by the throat and made the girl that he was dating give me oral sex. And when I orgasmed, I was hit to the floor. That was the turning point in my life where I decided that I had to do something else. I didn't 100% know what that something else was. I knew that I liked Batman, and I knew that Batman could have handled that. How could he have handled it? Martial arts. That's how I got into martial arts. That's the whole story. And so I say that because, like, that's a big chunk. But in the class, I said, and that's how I can talk about trauma. That's my resume for trauma. And you got people that are like, you know, teary-eyed and everything about me saying that. So I was in martial arts for an entire year. And for that year that I was in martial arts, I had an uncle that was abusing me and belittling me. You're wearing pajamas to fight? That's rubbish. That'll never work. That'll never work. That'll never work. And as the year progresses, there's a specific progression of, for me, like, oh, this block worked. So he didn't hit me the first time. He got me the second time, but he didn't get me the first time. That block really worked. Or he went to grab me and I could manipulate his wrist and then he couldn't hold on to me. And it's like, that worked too. And I also felt the intensity of an adult who wanted to keep control over a child increase because the control was slipping away. So to answer your question, it's me seeing all that and me experiencing all that, I'm a little bit more introspective and in tune than the average individual. Not for better or worse. It's just that's how I view things. Okay. And so when I'm in a class all the time, I am teaching each individual in the class. I'm very much aware of what's going on because when I was 9 years old, I had to know where he was, what it sounded like when he was asleep, what it sounded like when he was drunk. I needed to know how quiet I had to be to open up the refrigerator to feed myself. I needed to know where I could hide in the stairs until I could get out the back door. There was a lot that I had to know. And because there was a lot that I had to know, I have visceral feelings that are attached to that, as a lot of people do that experience trauma. The smell of the dirt and the mildew that is on the basement floor. The smell of piss and beer and vodka. Yeah, there's a lot of, they're not triggers anymore, but there's a lot of things that happen. And so I'm sure before that person, I had probably already taught somebody else that had some similar experience, but I hadn't gone through at 11. I'm able to stand up to my abuser. And it happened like this. He randomly come in to attack me in the bathroom the same way that he had done a multitude of other times. An instinct took in, catch his shoulder, turn around, hit him in the head, and throw him into the wall. And then I'm like, what did I do? And I feel fear Is he gonna get up? Am
Right.
I in for the worst ass whooping
Right.
ever? He's bleeding? Is he dead? I'm back out of the bathroom very, very slowly, down the hallway, out into the living room. And as I open up, the door's opening up and it's my grandmother. And she's like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, Perry fell and he's in the bathroom floor and he's bleeding really bad. And that's all I said. She goes in and looks, has to call 911. He has to go to the hospital, 9 stitches up here, right? He said he didn't remember that. He said that he didn't remember, but he never touched me again. He never laid hands on me again. It was only verbal and emotional abuse from that moment on. And so at 11, I can't say to myself, I'm safe. I'm clear.
Right.
I'm still wondering, when is he going to get revenge? When is the next one coming? So I lived on edge until he killed himself. And so I think that her story is very important to my story as a teacher, because her story happens so close to after I'm able to truly take my first breath of. And when he died, Chris, I remember I'm at his funeral. He was a twin. I had a really, really good uncle who was his twin, who was a kind, compassionate man. And he said, I'm not sad because my brother died decades ago when he started drinking. And there was something just very prolific about ushering him out of this world in that capacity, that I was able to have the full release of, I'm safe, I'm okay, I showed up for myself, and I'm enough to show up for myself all at once. And then it was like I owe a debt to martial arts because of what martial arts has done for me. And I owe it to other people to help them do that. And then here she is, breaking down in class, probably 6-ish months after, somewhere in that capacity, And so her visceral reaction reminded me of my reactions. I smelled the basement floor underneath the stairs where I would hide. I could probably almost feel the cobwebs as I'm rushing out to her, And in telling her, it's just unburdening everything that I have for sake of, you're not alone. Don't feel alone.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. That is, yes, it's absolutely heavy. I think so. That's an excellent answer. Also, put a lot in right there. As you said, there's a whole lot to unpack. On the baseline questions, before this event occurred, what was your general worldview? Did you feel safe in the world, or were you already a cautious person?
So the answer to that goes back to my birth defect. And in writing my book, I tell a story about when I was in kindergarten. I had gotten sick again. I was born with a birth defect, so I was sick frequently. I missed 64 days of school and was hospitalized for like 5-ish weeks of that. And all the other kids in kindergarten were making get well soon notes and this, and sent packages to me. And I write about the experience of, at 5 years old, looking death in the eye and just being okay with, I guess this is where the story ends. I guess this is the end of me. I am probably about to die right now. And
Wow.
being perfectly okay or at peace with it, because of everything that I had already gone through, everything that I'd already experienced. I'd already experienced a wealth of pain. And so my worldview has always been the baseline of accepting what is and being in the now, which is not what most people get. I'm fortunate enough that life has given me that lesson.
That is excellent. Can I ask you about, is that kind of what attracted you to Zen Buddhism?
The joke that I tell everybody is that Zen Buddhism is what comes from being raised in a Southern Baptist and Catholic mixed family.
Yeah.
So when part of the family's Catholic and part of the family Southern Baptist, and you spend a lot of time in corresponding churches, you're
Right.
like, nothing makes sense. I got to be
Yeah,
zen
makes
about
sense.
it. The answer is a little bit more convoluted than that. I remember when I was 14, I was at a party and this guy said, I am a Buddhist. And at 14, I was like, I've heard about Buddhism. What is that? And how are you a Buddhist? And he was like, well, I became a Buddhist because of reincarnation. And I had no idea about reincarnation. And he
Right.
said, if I take a pot and I plant a seed and I water this soil, maybe eventually something grows. Maybe it's a nice flower. I just keep watering the soil. And in watering the soil, maybe eventually this flower withers and dies and comes back and is back in the soil. But I just keep watering the soil. And he says something else grows. Is it the same plant? No. Is it the same energy?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, from that moment on, I was like, I'm listening. I'll hear it.
I love that. That was excellent. And the amount of information there is phenomenal, especially with that in your worldview. I could see how you would be very much so attracted to that, especially getting to acceptance, because it takes a long time to come around to acceptance and all of the different things that you have, and all of the stages before. Of course, most people are familiar with the stages of grief, but getting to that point and the stages of acceptance is excellent. For this, can you paint a picture of the setting? What were the sounds, smells, and vibe of the room, the street before? I think we actually went through a good check of that.
We did. What a lot of people don't know about my story is the house in which I was abused in was a house. It was built in 1952 by my grandfather, and has been in my family since it was constructed. And currently, I own it.
Oh, wow.
I live in it and I am renovating it. And I say that for the purpose of your audience understanding that some of these I will speak about as though they're fresh because I've just recently had to clean them up. Or some of them, I bought the house a little over 2 years ago and have been slowly renovating it and understanding that like it's not a normal renovation. You buy a house that you're not attached to and 3 months and it's done. Right?
Right.
But if you buy a house that has history, well, first thing I had to do was rip out a lot of things, get rid of them, get rid of the memories, get rid of, some rotting wood in the basement that had certain smell to it that, remind you of something, throw old clothes away. My uncle's suitcases were still there. My uncle's books were still there. My uncle's pictures were still there. And my uncle was, regardless of what happened to me, he was a broken man. And so all of his pictures, he had written nasty notes to people on. He'd X'd out people's faces. His hatred was very, physically present in his material that he kept.
Wow.
And so, throwing all that out was good for me. But I just want to frame that up so that people understand that, the texture of the wall has a feeling to it. Everything has a feeling, has a vibe. But the thing is it was my grandmother's house. It's where I learned to cook. It's where I got my appreciation for jazz. It's where I read Socrates and Aristotle. And it's where I learned to believe what you see on C-SPAN and question politics and think for yourself. So there's just as much positive as there is negative. And the idea is to wash away the positive or the negative with this renovation.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Wow. That's got to be a lot of intense emotions coming through, when you're doing it.
It really is. And I bought the space, or I bought the house 2 years ago, and I started doing the space, and there are parts of the project that I just haven't finished. And you can't, it's like if I emotionally can't finish it, I'm not going to beat myself up over it. I'm just going to go, okay, well, this is on hold, and I'll go over here and I'll sand this wall or, power wash this, or, there's plenty of stuff to do on a house that's that old.
Yeah.
So I just allow the process to happen kind of organically as it does happen. And when we spoke on your interview, you spoke of shadow work. I dare somebody to show me any more powerful shadow work than that. It is, it's intense.
Yeah. Very well said, sir. Intense is definitely the right word. That's excellent. So looking into the red flags in hindsight, were there quiet warning signs, a look in someone's eye or change in the air that your brain noticed but your logic ignored?
I haven't said this publicly. The change occurred when he was no longer an alcoholic and he started using heroin. And I noticed the difference was I went from feeling like I didn't want to be around him to feeling like I shouldn't be around him. The gut change of this is dangerous as opposed to this is unhealthy and just not good.
Right.
And the reason that I told you about that sexual abuse situation that was the turning point for me, which made me get into martial arts. And I had been in martial arts about 3 months, and he had only attacked me twice in that 3 months. But the second attack, I was actually in gi with my yellow belt in the basement.
Wow.
In the basement, there's metal pillars that are the perfect diameter to practice sticky hands and blocks. It worked perfectly. And I have been a devout student of martial arts since I started, because the reason that I got into it, it's like, I got to drill this 100 times, 1,000 times. It's got to stick because I got to stop this. He attacked me while I was in that basement practicing.
Wow.
Telling me about how I was wasting my time as he was kicking me. And when he would get me down and he would kick me, he would purposefully kick me in my chest where my scar is, because he knew it would take the wind out of me. It would hurt. Sometimes it would make me throw up on myself, and he would laugh at that. And he did that, kicked me 4 or 5 times, and then went over to his bed in the corner and had passed out. And at 10 years old, I knew how to administer heroin, and I knew that he used it to run. And at 10 years old, I did heroin. Only once. I didn't become addicted. Can't express exactly how much time had passed while I was under the influence. I ran up the stairs, out the back door, and down the little alleyway into the wooded area that's at the end of my street. And I don't know how long I was there, but I know that I was laying in the grass, looking up at the trees with my feet up on a log, and I know that it was raining, and I saw what I have always described as an angel. And that angel spoke to me and said, "You're on the right path. This isn't it, but if you keep going, you will find the answers you're looking for."
Wow.
I took that to mean not to do the heroin and to keep doing martial arts.
Right. Oh, it's an excellent meaning. Yes.
Right.
Wow.
Yes.
That is intense. That's, my goodness. Yes, your story is probably one of the most compelling, but also, some of the most difficult stuff. I can't imagine dealing with those things as an adolescent like that. And, I think the story of you, and especially as a sensei, makes a lot more sense when you have this there, and especially with Batman. I love that. I always talk to people about you need an alter ego. You need to be able to have the mindset of what would Thor do, what would Superman do, what would Batman do. Because when you can take yourself out of the you and put yourself into that perspective, it gives you the power and the strength and the knowing of this is what they would behave like. And then you're far more likely to do it because of that empowerment section. And I love that. Oh my goodness. Okay, so in the shift, can you describe the exact second when the social mask fell off and you realized this was a violent reality? What did the transition feel like physically?
The first time felt in the same capacity as what a car wreck feels like if you've been in a car wreck. I was sideswiped in a car wreck, and it's like your normal driving, and then there is an immediate shift because of, 1, an impact, and 2, the shock of the impact. So the very first time that I was hit, I was sent downstairs by my grandmother to get something out of her pantry. I heard him lumbering behind me and could smell him. I didn't know that he was going to smack me in the back of the head and make me see stars, make me drop the jar of whatever I was supposed to get.
Right.
That was the first time. It was an immediate shift, and there was a lot of shock that existed in, did he mean to do that? Did he know that he was doing that?
Right.
Was he thinking I was somebody else? You know, he's really drunk, and I know when he's drunk, he's silly and out of his mind, you know?
Right.
There was a lot of denial, and the denial occurred for the first 4 or 5 attacks until he started threatening me, saying that first of all, telling me that he had to do it to make me a man. If he didn't do it, I wasn't going to be worth a damn. And so that was the why. And then telling me that if I told anybody, he would hurt my mother and he would hurt my grandmother. So, sorry. I had to shoulder a lot at a young age. And I think that it forms a lot of a person having to shoulder that much.
Yeah, that's some of the heaviest stuff that you could have, especially at that age. You're not, cognizant of any of what you are today, and even in your 20s before you have all the life experiences, you still know so much more then than you do at those ages, for sure. And it had to be extremely difficult to have somebody, especially with the family member. This is one of the things we always talk about in reality of how these things work. Usually is somebody and it can be somebody very close to you, and it can be very difficult to take that part with it and try to separate yourself from the reality of this is what I have to do for me. Wow, that was extremely.
It informs a lot about how I teach. We talked about self-preservation, not self-defense, because I say in 4 hours I can't teach you how to defend yourself. But if you come to these classes over the course of 6 or 9 months, maybe I can teach you how to weather the storm. Is how I word it. But it informs for me a lot about when we're teaching self-preservation. Tell me if you've ever heard any other martial arts artists say this. But you teach woman self-defense, right? How big of an umbrella is that? Because what's the difference in a one-off attack where a woman is pulled into the bushes at a park,
right,
versus a domestic violence situation?
Yep. It's drastic differences, but the umbrella is huge. I mean, we're talking about entirely different things when that dynamic comes in.
And so there's different thoughts, feelings, environmental aspects that go into play to both of those hypothetical situations that I hope doesn't happen to anybody. But also the physicality of navigating those two situations is completely different.
Yeah.
So
that's, I like to say violence isn't one thing and neither is self-defense. Physicality of all the things you can do. There's a lot of things you can do, but what you're going to do in the moment, you won't know until you're in that moment. And one of the reasons why cross-training is super important is different people specialize in different things and will give you more tools for the tool belt. But, I think that leaving aspect is huge, because we know with Stockholm Syndrome and so many of these things, how that plays out into the psychological aspects versus there's a clear-cut bad guy who was dragging me to the bushes. That is a whole different world than the husband, the fiance, the boyfriend. And
the faceless bad guy is in some way, shape, or form easier to navigate than the fiance, than the uncle, than the what have you.
What do you do when it's somebody you don't want to hurt? I have a story on this. It's just a simple analogy, but I always say Bob's your uncle. You go over to your wedding, Uncle Bob is there, Uncle Bob gets drunk, and I didn't know, of course, with your story on how that would be with Uncle Bob, but I just use the analogy because you don't want to hurt your uncle. And say, they ask Bob to leave. Bob doesn't leave, so you go over there to help. Bob starts swinging on people. You don't want a violence of action in your uncle. You may have to, but when you get to that point, now you have this bigger layer there of how hard is it to do it now versus just some dude you don't know who's being an a-hole. It's a totally different thing.
The other thing is from experience when it is a prolonged situation with all these little microcosms that exist. And he was abusing me when I was 9. I didn't have any martial arts background until I was 10. I didn't finish this until I was 11. So there was a year of studying martial arts while also having to weather these storms. And you see a progression. You see how they get different, but you also see how to manage or mitigate a on-off transaction versus the overarching transaction. But more importantly, you also learn in that year, as messed up or always look on the bright side of life as this is, you learn what your own personal dial is on physical output, on stopping force, because at 11, I put him on his ass a year after doing martial arts, but like 6 months after doing martial arts, I could cover myself up. I could be okay. I could push with enough force to make him take a step back before he came at me harder. So I'm learning what that stopping force looks like versus good and bad, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's huge. And it's, somebody also did martial arts as a kid, and I remember those ages and what you're capable of then. It's nothing like what you're capable now as an adult. Especially if you're 6'5", 200-pound adult, you can grab somebody and they go up against the wall very quickly. That's not very hard for you whatsoever. But, with those at that age is very difficult to do. But I do like to say this, you fight from anger. There's a high likelihood you go too far because you're angry.
Yes.
If you fight from fear, there's a high likelihood you do just enough. So, and as crazy as it is to say, if you fight from fear, you're going to do enough to stop and then back up. And I know people don't like to experience that. I don't either, but you want to fight from fear, not anger. You get angry, you got a problem. You do it for fearful, probably pull yourself back because you just want to leave. That's all you want.
Well, and that last encounter, I didn't even know. We had practiced rear chokes in class. Yes, we had practiced pin the hand to yourself, turn, get the head, throw them to the ground. We had practiced that technique. I didn't know it was in there in enough of a way that as soon as I felt hands on the back of my neck, that I was going to react with it. If I was in anger, would I have mounted him and just kept punching? Would I have gone to juvenile jail over that? You know what I'm like these are realities. If my grandmother had come in a minute later to him bloody with me pounding on him, it could have been a completely different. Yeah. It changes the entire trajectory of life.
Right. 100%. And it's the hardest part about this and why, you have to try to go study as much as you can because it's lessons like that where, I think a lot of people are going to relate to, and they have their own experiences with this. And I always try to do these podcasts in long form of kind of, I think how you said was very well open-ended, but also with the section of just kind of being truthful and vulnerable. Like Michael Sensei, he said, about, if you lie to a child, it's tantamount to child abuse because you have to be able to share with them the truth. You never know who's listening, and those things are going to be internalized by them too. And I love the message of what you can do it because even at that age, when you get to that fearful mindset and you cage up and you move because you've been training them, it's certainly possible and it's very, very powerful. What was the very first coherent thought you had when you realized you were in danger? Was it a calculation, a prayer, or a command?
The first time that I realized I was in danger, that first attack, was after the fact. I was 9 and I went into complete flight. He hit me in the back of the head and I remember it hurting. I remember not having my full vision. And as soon as a couple blinks and shake and everything's fine, look up at him and just dart past him up the stairs and out the back door, which was the escape route a lot of times. But I didn't realize that I was in danger until I was outside and I was by the tree. And I remember there's a big tree in the backyard where my grandfather buried his dog and then planted a tree in honor of the dog. and it still is standing. And I would run out, and if I wasn't going to run down to the woods where I like to play, I would run and hide behind that tree. And I just pressed up against that tree as much as I could. And at that first time, especially, I'm grabbing bark. I'm trying to hold on to the tree for dear life. And like, then it's like, he's not here. He's not coming. He's not coming. He's not coming. What was that? You know, so
Yeah.
It was trying to process what it was.
Right.
I don't think anybody at 9 years old should have what to do in that situation. So
no, that's, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to talk about these things with this, even as adults. And, I think one thing I want to say for anybody who is watching or listening, if you get to a point where any of this resonates with you, please understand. We shared here before in the channel, groups, there's support groups, there is resources nationally, numbers, and I can't encourage enough to start to find your strength to be able to come share these stories, because you're not alone. So many of us have very similar experiences in these, and they can be some of the hardest things to deal with, but especially if you're holding on to it. If you're holding on to it and you don't have the ability to come in and talk, or you feel you don't because you're afraid of judgment. I know a lot of people won't talk to family about this stuff because they're afraid of judgment. They're afraid of these things. And there are excellent senseis out there that have this experience that can help you talk to this, whether it's a therapist or whether it's Sensei Coffey, they're explaining how this is going to be happening. When you can share that space, I think it's a really powerful thing, but it also will help you take the step to be able to grow. So I love that you do this with the healing arts specifically, because it's not commonly focused on. And a lot of us just navigate it by ourselves. We don't do it with a group. And maybe have you ever sat with a group before and talked while obviously teaching the class? But
no, there's been a couple of times. I will say two things to add to what you said. One, I am incredibly reachable online. Sensei Paul Coffey, just about everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. I'm not a licensed therapist, but I will talk to anybody. If this resonates with anybody, I don't mind having these conversations, helping steer somebody toward whatever positive outcome we can get out of your negative situation. That's what I do. That's why I teach. And then the other thing that I'll say is that, like, especially to the male audience, it is in some way, shape, or form in our society viewed that I'm weaker because I admit these things and say these things, and that being a man, I'm just supposed to suck it up, just deal with it, just move on past it, and, bottle it up, pence it up inside me. And that's not the way that we should be.
Right.
That's not the way to live. That's not the best way to approach things.
Right. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So, So one of the things that I do in my martial arts career currently is I teach at a couple of rehab facilities. So I teach a lot of, especially men, that are there because they have substance abuse issues because of similar situations. Not the very same thing, but very similar situations. So I've done a lot of communicating with them about ways that they can navigate it that's more helpful than trying to drink it out, because you won't be able to drink it out.
No, you're going to drink.
Yes.
Wow. Thank you so much for all of that. That was very, very powerful across the board. I love this and their message with this, because we were talking about this with sharing these things, and similarly in my story was happened with Jared Wallace, and I'm still messed up in the head over this today. But the one thing that I have found was sharing with people and the stories, and going to there's grief groups, and even if you don't want to call it that, I love what you said about this with the strength, because it not only are you not weaker, you have to be emotionally, mentally, and totally, completely stronger to be able to come out and say the stuff.
Yes.
Then you have to be a whole different level. I always like to say that a lot of times women are some of the strongest people I know, because they will come out and speak on these things, and men, we just sit back usually and go, You don't measure physical strength in your bicep, measure it in your force of will and who you are as a person to be able to come and admit, I'm human and these things happen, and it scared the shit out of me. And, I don't know many guys who are going to tell you, like, that scared the shit out of me. I always like to say, if you ever end up in a real violence, it's going to be scary as fuck. You are going to be shitting your pants, and you're going to be, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God, here we go. And I've never had it not be every time. A lot of people say, oh no, I thought when I was getting in there, and you can't be angry. Sure, you can be angry. Most of the time it's, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, this isn't fucking happening.
I think the best word, not to cut you off, but I think the best word is startling.
Yeah, that's very,
because it's so sudden, it's so abrasive, and for me at least, the fear, the self-doubt, the worry, the anxiety, all of that was second. That was after. In that split moment, it's like, what is going on?
Right.
Do you know?
Yeah.
In whatever capacity. Yeah. I still occasionally have nightmares because that same uncle would choke me while I was asleep.
Oh my God.
So I was used to being awoken by being choked.
Jeez. I'm so sorry to hear that. That's your parasympathetic nervous system hadn't calmed down for like years. It's like it's spiked at all times.
For sure. God. It took a very long time for me to settle it back down.
Wow. That is probably one of the most important reasons I think that you for who you are to pursue this with wisdom, but also with your teachings and how you do it, because I always like to say you don't know this kind of stuff until you live it. Like you can hear it and we can talk to you about it, but until you've experienced it and your nervous system has had that shock, it's not going to have, as you said very well, the visceral feeling of that in your gut until you do. And then once you do, especially, it's a shame in our culture. So many people really will bottle things up inside, and men and women. There are women that will also do that, and they, sometimes this with friend groups, but whomever you do decide to trust with it, I can tell you probably one of the easiest things in the groups, because they're strangers. You don't have a fear of judgment like that because I know you and this is who you are to me, and I have this expected role with you. When you're a stranger, you're just sitting there listening with an open heart because you know what happened to you. And so it can be some of the most freeing to do it that way. They also end up being very good friends of yours oftentimes because, well, we have this thing called trauma bond, which is good and bad, but also you have that ability to grow from it. And if you're going in a positive way, it can be very good. This is like pure gold. Thank you so much for all that you do here. Okay, so we got the decision. You made a choice, the action, a split second. Did that feel like a conscious plan or purely a primal reflex?
At 11, when I put him on his ass, that was a primal reflex. Maybe primal's the wrong word. It was martial trained reflex. But, time slows down, all the stereotypes. I could see each individual blade of the fan,
Right.
like everybody says. Do you know what has always happened to me? And I think it's because there were fluorescent lights in the basement. But anytime there's a physical conflict of any sort, things slow down so much and I focus on the light. Every light, even an LED, has a flicker to it. It's just happening at such a fast rate that you normally can't catch it. But like, everything slows down, my spidey sense comes on or whatever, and I start seeing the lights flickering. Right. And like that still happens, like, in a bar having to deal with some dumbass, whatever.
My apologies. I think I skipped a question there. So we have this listed as a sensory tunnel. And it was one of the questions. I think I just started scrolling up. People often report auditory exclusion, tachysphasia, which is time slowing down. What happened to your senses in the heat of that moment? So you saw the blades of the fan and the light flickering, and it just went.
And that was at 11. At 10, after the sexual assault, it was slower. But that was me making a conscious decision that, I had been beat up dozens of times over the past year. It couldn't happen anymore. This was definitely, I remember at 10 saying, if this happens again, I'm probably dead.
Wow.
And
that's
so
a hell of a thought to happen.
like I'm not going to survive this anymore. And like years later, I actually, there's a comedian that goes by the name of Shane Moss, and he has a podcast that's a science podcast because he's really into science. And he had one of these neuroscientists on, and they were having a conversation because he couldn't wrap himself around suicidal ideation. Like us as mammals, we're kind of wired to survive, to continue.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
And so for a mammal to go, I want to die, it doesn't really work.
Right.
And like even, you rationalize, well, anxiety was like, shit, there's a bear. I better watch that. This berry killed my buddy. I don't want this berry. Like anxiety is a tool. And so the neuroscientists and them had a conversation. And at the end of the conversation, they got to a lovely thing, which was instead of saying, I want to die or I'm going to kill myself, say, if this doesn't stop, it will kill me. And then you figure out what this is and you can change it. And that's what, like, I remember hearing that in that podcast and thinking back, like when I was 10, I didn't say, I want to kill myself. This can't happen again. I said, if this continues, it's going to kill me. And then you solve this.
Yeah. That is a hell of a thought to have at any age, much less 10. And I love how you have that intuition at that age, though, because there is a turning point for most DV people and their mindset, because they hear it all the time. They know, and most of them are even aware of what Stockholm Syndrome is, and they're just in denial for a little while. But all the research on that shows that there is this pivotal moment, and when they actually do, go to get out, the thing is, the longer you're in it, the worse it gets. And the longer you're in it, the harder it is to kind of maneuver around that. To get you the book, The Timeline of Self-Defense, is why that third pillar in community is huge. And you can have it as a community of the martial arts. You can have it community and just family and friends that you are safe and trusted with and telling these things to. But if, you're trying to hold all this in, this is why it's so important to do, because you can go and talk about these things and get not just feedback, you can get help from people and to move on and get out of that situation. And it's just huge. I'm so sorry you had to experience this at 10. This is all very difficult, and it takes a lot to be able to, number one, as you mentioned, as a man in our culture, to be able to even speak on these things. It's going to be a long time. He's going to bottle this stuff up. But I think the work you do is excellent with this, because taking that and sharing that part of yourself and kind of bringing people with you along that in the journey of this is what's happened, but let me help you. And there's a few instructors I've heard talk about where we'll develop programs for the student. And I've done it a few times as well. It's not super common. Usually you come do the syllabus. But for specific situations, and you can go find a good instructor who will help you kind of navigate this. And it's that outside perspective that you need to hear and get. And I love that you said that about being reachable online as well. I think, we should encourage everybody, if you can reach out to Sensei Coffey and explain, your situation. He's willing to hear your story and help you. I think that part is huge, because not often do we get to do it with people who are closest to us. And if you have somebody who is experienced in this and as a teacher, it'd be very beneficial for you to share that part of yourself and learn. I can't thank you enough for doing these things. Please go.
Remember back to our conversation where I was interviewing you and you turned the question back on me. Yeah. One of the first things that people need is to be heard.
Right.
I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not claiming to be. Right. I will listen. Yeah. I will give you my opinion. I will share the love and the sympathy that I have for what you're going through. But to be heard, it's one of the most important.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of podcasters do that when they're coming from that space of this is what's happened. So, it's almost like screaming out of the echo chamber. Who else can relate? And, God, it's difficult to hold space for yourself. It's hard to hold space for others, but it's really hard to hold it together and share it, because you have to be vulnerable enough to be able to speak on these things. As Instructor King likes to say, this is the stuff that gets too messy for a lot of places. You're not to go through a lot of that. You're not going to hear this on the dojo floor. You're not going to hear these things in that capacity. Okay, give me one.
Something within our culture that exists that I don't think needs to exist is that if you have your sensei on the dojo floor having these conversations, it sort of perpetuates my sensei's kind of weak,
Yeah, no.
when that's not the case, So I think if you do find somebody that you connect with and they are sharing their story and relating and expressing those things, count that as a strength, not a weakness.
It's a huge strength. You to be able to even, and I think everybody who's a survivor is going to know how easy is it to go talk. You don't have these base level conversations with just people. Go into the deeper stuff. That's all you really have is base level conversations. I think everybody who's experienced it is going to resonate with you so much on this because speaking your truth, you're speaking the truth of how these things actually play out. And that's huge. The immediate aftermath. Once the threat was gone, what was the first thing your brain tried to solve or rationalize?
There was that guilt. There was did I hurt him? Did I kill him?
Oh, man.
Is he knocked out? What's going on? Is he going to bleed to death? It was guilt or fear for what I had done. And then I remember that fear did not dissipate until the ambulance pulled away. And I can remember the ambulance pulling away. And then I was like, more or less, I thought he's going to get patched up and he's going to come back here and I've got hell to pay for what's about. So then the fear took over, and the fear in that moment, probably because I had stood up for myself, that fear carried for a month or better. I was more on edge, more looking around the corner, more not sleeping at night than I had been the previous 2 years, because I just knew he was going to be mad and he was going to get even. Right. And
yeah, that's so hard. Yeah, I always say it's almost like the anticipation is worse than the actual fight. I have to throw down, and I got to throw down that's going to suck for 30 seconds. The fear can be 30 hours. It can be 30 months. Yes. It's like, you don't know what's
the actual altercation that ended my abuse couldn't have been more than 10 seconds.
Right.
If that. I'm standing at the sink brushing my teeth. Hands come up and grab me. I seal the hand, turn, hit his head, and throw him. 10 seconds? If that?
Right.
And all of it 100% instinctual. All of it, the martial arts had worked. That's why I get so mad at people online for saying that would never work. That would never work. Because one, first of all, it did fucking work for me. Right. So it will work. But two, they are diminishing a weapon that somebody else may be able to use that may work for them and may save them out of this situation.
Absolutely. On say it's a TikTok channel. There's the third pin video. I talk about martial arts misconceptions, and what we always say is you have your reaction, you have your response. Your reaction is like you go to the doctor takes a little rubber mallet, he hits your knee, and it pops out. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Mm-hmm. If you're looking at any of these things, you're always going to have the body's going to move to be trained. That's why flinch response is what it is. Baseball comes flying at your head. Everybody has flinch response. So you just install these things into your basal ganglia, and then your response is cognizant. You now know you're in a fight. Now you know you have to do something, and that's where the brain really kicks in from the prefrontal cortex into the amygdala and the fight, flight, or freeze. Mm-hmm. And you now have to take what you can if you don't immediately freeze. And that's the hardest part. Is I think a lot of people have like a guilt for freeze almost, and it's a biological response. This isn't something that is. You're not choosing. You just, it happened. And this is when we talk about this with the OODA loop and how to jump from up to A. Because if you know about it and you can install it ahead of time, then you can jump from O to A. But it has to be an immediate trigger. It has to be installed in the flinch response and gross motor motion. And then you can. But I love how you said that because, it could be in Taekwondo. It could be an axe kick. If you've trained that 10,000 freaking times and all of a sudden comes up and you just axe check them down across the side of the face, you're going to do it so hard, so fast without thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure plenty of Taekwondo people. They're really, really good at kicking.
Right.
Like,
And an
I
axe
have
kick is
no doubt
painful.
this. Oh yeah, I would always like to say, think about this with kicks and horses. You want a horse to kick you? Because I don't. And yeah, it's a human, but think about people's size of their thighs. Like, it's not like a bicep coming. It's like a leg coming in. You got a big problem. Okay, so let me talk about this with the evolution. How has your threat detection system changed when you walk into a room now? What is the first thing that you see that most people miss?
Everything.
That's a really good point. We all looking at their phone?
Well, they are all looking at their phones as opposed to me who's carrying it as a weapon. The phone, guys, makes a good impact weapon. I will go in someplace new and that's like somebody gets an apartment and they invite me over and they're like, what do you think of the place? I'm like, it's really good, except that spot on the ceiling where they rolled the paint up on the ceiling while they were painting the walls. That kind of really bothers me, but the place is really good,
And they're like, I've never seen that before.
So whoever installed your bathroom on your vanity, they put the hinge too far forward, so the side closest to the hinge actually sticks out in an uncomfortable way.
Right.
Like I'm paying attention to everybody. We used to do a joke with some of my senior students. We would go to the ball and they would be like, that guy. I was like, that guy's got a bad left shoulder and his ankle had some sort of injury, but he seems to have healed mostly from the injury. I'd kick him in the ankle as I go for the side that the shoulder's a problem. And I'm doing that with everybody on a microcosm level so quickly that I don't necessarily always pay attention to it. I don't actively register it, but I don't go any place where there's people and I don't size them up.
Right. No, when you that tune into the environment, you don't need to. You just know where to go.
Well, the other problem is if you were hurt, and this goes for everybody, anybody listening this, everybody that I teach, if you were hurt by somebody you care about, somebody that you knew, trusted, and thought you were safe with, you now don't trust anybody. You have to work harder to open yourself up. You have to work harder to realize that that was the blip and not the standard.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point too. And these things are always so difficult when you're talking about all of that. With that, I love how you mentioned this with the microcosm because you really can. You can see things. That everything was such a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the gift of fear. What is something you understand about human nature, the dark or the light, that you never could have understood without this experience?
So when you sent me all the questions, like I kind of like you understand a little bit about how this conversation is going to flow. But then I got to that question. I was like, that question is philosophical on levels that I am not even sure can be answered. I have a different understanding with death than most people because of my past. I have a different understanding with abuse, with violence in general. I would say if I have to pick one thing, the one thing that I would pick, we've heard it before in relation to trauma. You shouldn't compare traumas. But when people say that, they're saying that like, this is my story, but look what happened to them. That's so much worse. So you would diminish your own story for somebody else's. Right. But what I have also learned is you don't compare today's trauma with your yesterday's trauma.
Right.
Because too often people are like, I went through hell, so this isn't that bad. Especially my women students, because they'll be in a relationship that's loveless but is okay, or I have literally heard the words, he only hits me occasionally. And one, lost my shit. Two, I may have brown bagged that dude's head and threw him in the back of a van to have some words with him. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah.
He only hits me occasionally, and that's okay because I have weathered a storm where I was hit all the time. No, it doesn't work that way. I think, like, if I could teach or leave students with one thing, just because you went through the mud doesn't mean that quagmired water is better.
Yeah. I think that needs to be put on a bumper sticker. To have that whole thing for sure. That's such a good point. And I'm still stuck on the occasionally part. I'm sorry. I'm like the brown bag part was a good point. Yes, I like. Okay, if you could give the audience one mental tool or a piece of invisible armor to carry with them, what would it?
It would be the lesson that is extremely hard to allow to sink in, but that you are enough to change whatever part of your story you got to change. You're enough to show up for yourself. You have what it takes to end the horrible situation and to get out the other side better.
Very well said. That is excellent. That is excellent. Okay. Lastly, all these years later, has your perspective changed about any of these things from the occurrence then? And have you changed anything about what you train now versus then for yourself and your students?
I can say that after 33 years of martial arts, I am no longer afraid. And now I am stepping towards what I consider to be a master level. There was an instructor in Louisville before he passed away, and he would do class. And then, you say, this is what we're working on. And then after saying this is what you're working on, he would say, please remember, a martial artist is somebody that can fight somebody. A martial arts master is somebody that can navigate a dangerous situation without both parties losing their lives.
That's excellent. I love that so much. So much of this is just go.
So that's how it's changed. At 43, I can say that my uncle had a lot of trauma and no way of dealing with it, and not making an excuse for what he did to me, but an understanding of why he did what he did. And in that, a forgiveness for the broken man that was in front of me.
Right. Wow. That, I always like to say that we don't forgive for others, we forgive for ourselves. And there is a hole, dig for others, but only you lay down in. If you go lay down in the hole that is anger, you will be forever angry. But if you can find a way to forgive for yourself and your own personal healing journey, then you will find ultimately what you're looking for on the other side. But if you stay in resentment and hate and anger, and very literally the dark side, to make Star Wars references, but if you stay in the dark side, you will live in the dark side.
Absolutely.
If you can find the light, you can find the healing, you can find the forgiveness. Thank you so much for this, sir. This was excellent. I very much so appreciate carrying, all of these things not just in common, but all the lessons you share with the audience and their things. And I like how you ended it. Was there anything that you haven't had the opportunity to say as a...
No, I'm good, man. I'm good. You did a great job. I like how thoughtful you are with the questions and the structure. It paints a good picture. And for somebody that's shared this 3 or 4 times on the podcast, dozens of times teaching it out in the world, I got new perspectives out of walking through it in this way. So I appreciate that.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And lastly, where can people find?
People can find me everywhere, Sensei Paul Coffey, Sensei Coffey. If you want to email me, please do so. keepkickingpod, P-O-D, @gmail.com.
That is excellent. Awesome, sir. Well, I appreciate you, and we will talk with you here again. And